Hi everyone, Shade here with an updated version of my Blight Necromancer featuring the X-Foul Ring. This thing is insane. As you saw in the clip before this started, I crit for almost 5 million. I've seen crits up to 7 million. I've soloed Duriel with not a lot of gear, basically the gear that you'll see, and it's just amazing. I'm missing a few defensive pieces and Tybalt's Will, but this is extremely strong. X-File is crazy awesome, and I suggest you try to find it. I got lucky and found it. It's a Duriel drop if you want to target farm, but let's get into the build. It hasn't changed much from my previous video, but I'll show you kind of where I went Paragon wise and show you some of the gear, which hasn't really changed except for the fact that I have X-File. All right, let's jump into my gear real quick. Like I said, most of it hasn't changed since you last saw this except for X-File, so I'll go through it really quickly. I have Shielding Storm on my helmet. I haven't found anything better yet. I'm rocking with some cooldown reduction to get my skills up faster, and Shielding Storm, of course, to give Bone Storm that barrier. I have Void on my chest, which adds a CC component to Blight. You want to get quad resistance if you can. I wasn't able to get 4. I got 3 out of the 4. You want just kind of general damage reduction if you want, but you want quad damage reduction if you can get it. On my hands, I haven't changed out the aspect yet, but what I'm looking for is critical strike chance and lucky hit chance. I added 3 ranks of Blight to just make my Blight stronger. That's not really required because a lot of the damage on this build is going to actually come from the X-File ring and the Shadow Blight procs, but Blight just kind of gives us extra damage while we're trying to fish for those procs. For your legs, I'm running Disobedience. You also want to try to get quad resistance, but the ultimate item is actually Tybalt's Will. This gives you up to 40% multiplicative damage when you are unstoppable, which means we'll probably change to Metamorphosis, and I'll walk through the vampiric powers and which one I would change from to Metamorphosis, but that adds an extra unstoppable as well as Blood Mist, which is unstoppable, and Tybalt's Will just gives us 40% more damage while we're unstoppable and for 4 seconds after. For my feet, I still have Explosive Mist. You can go Ghostwalker if you want. Explosive Mist just gives me some extra damage while I'm in Blood Mist. It's a lot of fun. What we're looking for here is movement speed, dodge chance, and then 3 ranks in the Corpse Tendrils. For my amulets, I'm still running Decay. This again hasn't changed. This just gives Shadow Blight extra damage that stacks up to 5 times. I'm looking for cooldown reduction. 3 ranks in all corpse skills is a major need here. And then I have Gloom, but any of the shadow passives work. And then I also have darkness damage on here because X-Foul, we'll go through it. Its damage is actually shadow, so this buffs its damage. My rings, wondering, I have the aspect of Grasping Veins, just adds critical strike chance and then critical strike damage to our Corpse Tendril skill. And on this, I'm looking for critical strike chance, critical strike damage, and then lucky hit if I can get it. I don't have it on here. I rolled vulnerable damage instead. The damage to distance doesn't really matter. If you can get that off, I would say get that off for lucky hit chance, but crit strike damage, crit strike chance, and lucky hit are all important. And we're on X-File. X-File is just crazy good. It rolls with lucky hit, cooldown reduction, damage over time, and all stats. And what it does is basically your damage over time effects have a 50% chance to erupt on a lucky hit, which is why we want to stack lucky hit. And it deals a crazy amount of damage of the same type to nearby enemies. So it's basically an explosion of damage, which is why everything takes, 4 million plus damage. I routinely see 1 to 2 million hits, and then it just keeps rising up to 4 to 7 million. Eventually, this is just an amazing ring. Get it, enjoy it. It really supercharges this build. And then for my weapon, I have a wand because it does come with inherent lucky hit chance, and with the X-Foul and some of the other things, lucky hit is actually a pretty good stat to have because we want to fish for some of those procs. On here, I just have critical strike damage, intelligence, damage to shadow damage over time affected enemies, which is all good stuff. Even the 39 stats is pretty good, but getting like critical strike damage because we do want to get as much critical strike chance as we can because our Shadow Blight can crit and our X-Foul procs can crit. And then we can just add the critical strike damage, which 50% of it is multiplicative and then the rest is all additive, but it's all just equals big damage. And then on my offhand, I'm using Blighted, which I deal increased damage after Shadow Blight procs 10 times. What we're looking for on here is critical strike chance, lucky hit chance, and cooldown reduction. Offhands are inherent with cooldown reduction. You can wear a shield, but you get more defensive stats there, which if you're going to push higher nightmares, I would suggest you get a shield. But for right now, I have this on here. As far as my skills go, nothing has changed from my last video. I used Reap to just help generate corpses. Blight kind of pulls enemies in and does extra damage. Blood Mist is my defensive cooldown, which gives me immunity and unstoppable. Plus, it also procs certain damage aspects, one from the explosive mist, the other one from my vampiric powers. The main damage driver is corpse explosion, and we use blighted corpse explosion for the pools. We take all the extra corpse things like the hued flesh, Grim Harvest, and Field by Death. Then we take Corpse Tendrils, which is a great CC and DPS, which pulls enemies in, just pulls them and keeps them on your pools by stunning them, and it doesn't take a corpse. It uses the corpse, but doesn't cost a corpse. And we take all the Shadow passives here of Reaper's Pursuit, Gloom, Terror, and Crippling Darkness. We only put 1 point in there. That just gives our Darkness skills a chance to stun the enemy, which helps drive some damage. Passives for our ultimates are standalone. We just get extra damage reduction for having no minions, and then Memento Mori for extra sacrificial bonuses from our skeletons. Our ultimate is Bone Storm. We deal darkness damage over time with this, which also gives us a chance to proc Shadow Blight and X-Foul. And then we also have Shielding Storm for the extra barrier. We take everything here just to get damage reduction and extra critical strike chance. And the key passive we take is Shadow Blight. This basically just has a chance to deal extra damage, and this damage can crit, and it can also... I don't know where I was going. I'll start with that. And then finally, we take Shadow Blight as our key passive. This just has a chance to proc on our damage over time, and it does, 3.8 to 4.7 thousand damage, has a chance to crit, and does some really good damage. It drives a lot of your damage until X-Foul starts kicking in, and then X-Foul just exponentially increases your damage. As far as Paragon goes, I'll just go through the glyphs really quick and what boards I'm using. So my first glyph is Control. This just helps us deal extra damage to crowd-controlled enemies, which every enemy that's in our Corpse Tendrils is. And we do extra damage to stunned enemies. The first board you take is Wither. Wither just has a chance to flare up, and that's based on our intelligence. So it gives us more damage and a higher chance to happen the more intelligence we have, which is our main stat anyway. So we're always wanting to take intelligence. So this is just a great one to have, especially as a Shadow Necromancer. We take all the damage and damage reduction based on shadow damage, and the first glyph we take is Darkness. I put Darkness in here. We deal extra shadow damage, and this hits all of your damage. It hits the Shadow Blight procs, it hits the X-Foul ring, it hits all your dot damage, it hits everything. So we want to take it and pump as much intelligence into it as we can. As you can see, at max ranks, we're dealing almost 86% more shadow damage. The next board we take here is Flesh Eater. This just allows us to do 40% more damage after consuming 5 corpses. And the glyph we choose here is Exploit. Exploit is different on casters, as I explained on my last video. Basically, this just allows us to deal more damage to vulnerable enemies, and we're making enemies vulnerable through the vampiric powers. So taking this just ramps up our damage after we deal enough damage to enough vulnerable enemies. It's really good. I did go and take the poison resistance here. I've been trying to take down Duriel, so I wanted to max out my poison resistance. Resistances are really, really good this season and probably onwards, so learn to love them. The next board that we take after that is Tent of Death. Depending on how many corpses we have nearby, we either deal more damage or take less damage. So it's both really good, so just take it. The glyph here is Scourge. This buffs our shadow damage over time, which also buffs our Shadow Blight damage, because all the shadow damage over time increases Shadow Blight damage. So this fuels a lot of our damage. It does not fuel X-Foul procs, but it fuels our consistent damage and Shadow Blight. So get as many intelligence nodes as you can here as well. Also, don't forget to stop down here and get the extra critical strike damage. We do crit a lot, and I know I do have a ton of critical strike damage, but it all kind of adds up, and we start critting quite often because I have over 40% chance to crit. And the last board we take is Bloodbath. This is kind of an optional one. I just took this because it fit the Essence glyph really well, which Essence beefs up our critical strike damage by a ton. I mean, I have almost 200% critical strike damage from this alone, as well as the 22 on top to deal 22% more critical strike damage to enemies that are not healthy. So anything below 80% health takes 22% more critical strike damage. It's amazing. Then I have this. We do fortify ourselves every now and again, so having extra damage while fortified is always good too. So the vampiric powers we have are, I took Domination to do extra increased damage to stunned enemies. Anything hit by our corpse tendrils gets stunned unless it's a boss. So it takes 24% more damage. Then I have Anticipation. This gives us a flat cooldown reduction to our ultimate skill, Bone Storm, and then Bone Storm deals a lot of damage for each nearby enemy affected by our dot spells, which is all of them. So it just starts dealing a ton of damage, and it's shadow damage over time, so it does have a chance to proc X-Foul. We take Prey on the Weak to just do extra vulnerable damage, and then anything affected by our Vampiric Curse is vulnerable, and we apply that via a Cursed Touch. With a lucky hit, we inflict Vampiric Curse on an enemy, and then that has a chance to spread to other enemies. Pretty soon the entire screen becomes cursed and they're all vulnerable, and they also allow us to store souls, which when we use Blood Mist we fire off, and it does AoE shadow damage to everything. So it's a nice source of damage on top of everything else, especially when you're hitting a defensive cooldown. And lastly, we take Flowing Veins. Anything affected by Vampiric Curse also takes 60% increased dot damage. I would say Domination is actually the glyph I would probably swap with Metamorphosis. Metamorphosis, basically whenever we invade, we become unstoppable for 2 seconds, and then enemies, oh, this is at level 1, so we'd want to get that up to level 3. But enemies take damage and are inflicted with Vampiric Curse. This will help Tybalt's Will give us the 40% damage. And then if you pair that with a pair of boots that when your attacks reduce evades cooldown by a certain amount of time, this allows you to evade a lot, so you can kind of almost keep Tybalt's Will up 100% of the time, because when we hit Blood Mist, we invoke the 40% extra damage, and then when we hit evade, we also have that damage increase, so we can essentially do it all the time. So hopefully we can keep that up and keep it rolling. I haven't been able to test it, I will just say that now, but I'm assuming that it will be very, very good. And that's the build in a nutshell. I know I went kind of fast, but I do have another video that kind of goes more into details on this. I didn't want to have 2 super long videos on the same thing. I just kind of wanted to show off how great X-Foul is. It's amazing. Like, I went from running 30s to doing 60s with just getting that ring. So that's how much of a boost it gives. And once I start getting actually more defensives, I'm going to be able to increase that to probably doing tier 80s, if not up to 100s, depending on how well I can do or which nightmare dungeons. But I suggest trying to get it. I know it's hard. Like I said, it's a Duriel drop, so it won't drop for everybody. I got it from a nightmare dungeon, so there is a chance that it'll drop outside of Duriel. It's just one of those low chances, like Tempest Roars, where you just have to kind of get lucky. I was 100 when I got it, so I just kind of got lucky. But once you find it, trust me, you're gonna like it, and I would suggest using this build. So until then, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. I guess I will say I do have a Twitch, so if you want to watch me play this or some other games, go ahead and join me. I'm happy to talk about anything that you want. So thanks a lot, and I'll catch you guys later.